Hello, everyone. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Matt Mumma to the show. Matt is the president of Scioto Properties, which is doing some really interesting work in real estate development space around housing for people with disabilities and their families. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be a guest.
So, Matt, tell me what Scioto Properties is all about.
Yeah, we've been an organization now for over 20 years, and we provide impact real estate solutions to help improve the outcomes of individuals served that live in the homes that we own and lease to direct care providers. And we try to find efficiencies for providers. You know, we take a lot of pride in not being a landlord that simply sits back and collects a rent check. And we currently serve not only the developmental disability industry, but we also provide supports and services, housing supports and services to individuals with traumatic brain injury, behavioral health needs, substance abuse, adult day services, inpatient rehabilitation, and then we also do some small senior care homes.
So in your case, a provider of services to someone with developmental disabilities, maybe some sort of in-home support provider, or a company that in some way serves these clients, is also going to be involved in providing their housing. It isn't like a separate, distinct thing, and they come to you and you guys lease space, apartments, basically, to their clients. Is that the way?
Yeah, housing of all different types. So in our 20 plus years as an organization, we've grown to have over 1,900 properties in 40 states, and so we're really all over the space in terms of what types of real estate we acquire and we lease back to healthcare providers. It could be a larger intermediate care facility for individuals with developmental disabilities. Really nationally, the push has been to get away from that, to get into community-based accessible housing for people with disabilities. So that's been a huge focus of ours. So ICFs of all different shapes and sizes, licensed group homes, single family homes, and then apartment buildings. That's one of the new concepts that we really have grown attached to, really from the standpoint of it allows us as a housing provider that supports individuals with developmental disabilities. It allows us to move them from larger institutionalized settings out into community-based settings, where it's really fully integrated with the general public, and we can make the apartment spaces, fully accessible for individuals with disabilities.
Do you ever provide housing support direct to consumers, or rental opportunities direct to consumers?
Yeah, so one of the big things that we've focused on with the developmentally disabled population is that as an organization, we've not specifically serviced individuals directly that have developmental disabilities. And that is the largest growing market that's out there for, that's desperately in need of housing. So, we have historically supported providers, but we've had to really reevaluate over the last couple of years our service model and how can we better serve that population. So individuals that are very high functioning, that hold community employment, they have benefit money, they can pay rent. And, they may, with a roommate or two, they could be tremendously successful if they just have the right type of housing that's accessible to help them meet their needs in public. So we've really started to focus on that population, trying to find housing solutions to where we can lease directly to individuals with disabilities as opposed to directly to the providers.
And you are in 40 states, right?
We are 40 states.
40?
Yeah, soon to be 41.
Oh, really? Can you tell me what state you're going into?
Yeah, we're really looking at Arkansas. We've had a lot of great
Wonderful.
discussion with the state of Arkansas. It's not been a market that we have typically served. We had a great meeting recently with a large provider in that market, as well as the state of Arkansas, about opportunities. They have, over the next 3 years, thousands of individuals coming off the IDD wait list who are going to be in need of community-based housing. And so as a housing provider that really supports individuals with disabilities and trying to make housing affordable and accessible to them, we want to be a large part of that. And so had a lot of great conversations with folks in Arkansas, and we expect that to be our 41st state here in the near future.
So you guys buy property that you lease out, or do you guys, are you subleasing property?
Yeah, so we don't sublease. So we can acquire homes off the market. We can custom build properties. That's one of the things that we also do. So we work with, several provider organizations across the country that like construction as an option. And so I actually had a meeting this morning with a provider in Pennsylvania about construction as a service model. And we had a good discussion about housing inventory and just some of the struggles with housing currently in the market with, lender rates the way they are, and just the lack of quality housing that's out there, that's not only quality housing, but is also accessible to individuals with disabilities. And it's just very poor right now. And so one of the things that we've done is we can do ground up construction, whether it's stick built or manufactured housing. And we can really do it to the point where it's accessible from the forefront of the construction to where we really deliver it over to the provider and the individuals with disabilities. It's really kind of custom built for them based off what their needs are.
I've heard about, interviewed some guests. I've had guests on my show who are doing building housing and developing properties, and it takes a long time. So I guess I have a number of questions. First is how many, two questions. First of all, how many people are you serving? How many people are getting housing through the housing stock that you create or provide? And then second, are people in your housing typically living in buildings that you have built that provide this housing, or are they living in apartments that you have bought, condos that you have bought, and stuff like that, where it's just one-offs?
Yeah, great question. So, typically, we try to reevaluate on an ongoing basis, usually annually, just the number of individuals that we've been able to help serve. And right now it's between probably 7,000 and 8,000 individuals with disabilities that we've been able to help serve out in community-based settings. So, we take a lot of pride in that. We hope the number continues to grow for decades to come, but it's a number that we're passionate about, and it's really what we're all about. Impact real estate. We want to continue to be impactful in what we own and serve as many people as possible. In terms of, the types of real estate, we've been able to build ground up anything from a single family home to larger traumatic brain injury facilities, that serve considerably more than just a 4 or 5 person single family home. Predominantly the real estate that we own across the country is single family homes that are leased directly to service providers who provide supports and services directly in those assets to individuals with disabilities.
So does your company modify the homes for any either government set or provider desired architecturally accessible standards?
We do. So that's another service area that we really take a lot of pride in. So not only do we have the ability to buy a home off the market, we also have the ability to basically rehab it or renovate the home to make it accessible, whether it's widening doorways so individuals with wheelchairs are able to pass freely. We can do ramps. We can retrofit bathrooms to make them accessible to individuals with disabilities. So we really have the construction capabilities to really rehab any property across the country.
That's very cool. Do you have any projects that you've developed? That's one of the things that have been coming up a lot on the interviews I've been doing recently is the idea of inclusive housing, where you'll build an apartment structure or environment with multiple housing units in it, that where only a certain portion of them will be for the provider's clients and the rest will be for a general population, perhaps low income, but certainly a general population. I've heard about just recently, I heard about a really cool project in the DC area called Main Street, which has built this. I don't know if you know about Main Street, but in any case, do you do any kind of development of things that are sort of catching that trend in the market?
Yeah, we really see that as a trend that is continuing to grow. It's one that we've actively participated in. And, a good example of that is here in our home state of Ohio, we acquired a 72 unit apartment building. So it wasn't ground up construction, but we found an apartment building that was for sale. And, it just so happened to be in our home state, which was also great. And, we looked at it and we thought that it was a great opportunity for us to take some of the vacant units and, quote unquote, earmark them for individuals with disabilities. And, we don't want to take 72 units and basically just say, okay, here's an entire apartment building that can be used by individuals with disabilities, because that's really not helping the system progress. It's basically just taking an entire apartment building and just throwing a bunch of people with disabilities in it. And we don't want to do that. We want it to be inclusive housing that's community integrated with the general public. And so, we've earmarked probably, 15 to 20% of those 72 units to be available as they come open to individuals with developmental disabilities. And we'll make all the appropriate modifications needed to the apartment units to allow those individuals to be better served. So it's providing good housing that's, it's quality housing, because we only try to buy, the highest level or quality of housing that's on the market. We can make it accessible to individuals with disabilities. And also it's really integrated with the general public. So you or I could rent an apartment there if we so choose. And, that's really what it's all about, is trying to get away from institutionalized care.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And we have such a shortage of housing too, across the country that is accessible, which is, we talk about that on this podcast all the time. What
Mhm.
about the trend towards smart homes and smart technology to provide that service providers, many of them around the country, are embracing to serve their clients? Does that touch your world at all?
It does. We partner with a company called Simply Home. I'll give a little
I
shout out to
interviewed them.
them.
I did an interview with them earlier this year.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful company.
Jason,
Wonderful.
right? Jason.
Jason, yeah. Jason and Alan Ray. Wonderful
That's
people,
right.
wonderful company. I think smart homes are really the wave of the future. I talked about Arkansas earlier, and that's one of the discussions that we're having with them is how do we, with all of the thousands of individuals that are coming off of their wait list and their developmentally disabled system, how do you accommodate for all of them in the public, in public housing, or in apartments, or in single family homes? And for a lot of individuals, the only way to really be able to do that is to have the homes be smart homes, to allow them to be able to function as independently as possible with as minimal supports as possible. And one of the critical things that I see happening in the country, really over the last several years, has been just the crisis that healthcare service providers in the IDD space are having with staffing. It's beyond a crisis at this point. And as a result, smart homes and technology are really the way of the future, in my opinion, in terms of being able to take individuals that are higher functioning and can live in community-based settings, but they still need some element of care. That's where technology can come into play and make a huge difference. And if they have the right technology and the right real estate, it can really keep them in community-based settings, as opposed to having to go backwards in the system to where they're living in, licensed facilities or, state-run institutions. So I really see it as the wave of the future.
Do you think, though, that your developments give a provider a leg up in integrating smart home technology and smart service technology into their service offering?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what's interesting about Scioto as a company is that, in our 20 plus year history as an organization, we have always had a president of the organization that came from the provider side. So we really, in my background prior to joining Scioto about 3.5 years ago, is I came from the healthcare, the DD service provider side, where I was with the same provider agency here in Ohio for 20 years. And so we understand the pain points of our providers. We understand the struggles that they have. And I think that, having Scioto as a real estate partner, where we've come from the provider side, we know the struggles that they have. And we don't want to be just the landlord that sits back and collects a rent check. We want to try to find ways to make the service system better, not only for the provider, but for what's most important, which are the people that receive services in the real estate that we own and the providers that we work with operate within. So I think that's one of the big benefits of working with us versus an independent local landlord that does just sit back and collect a rent check, is that we understand the provider's needs. We've actually provided direct care service delivery to individuals with disabilities, and we understand the service systems that are, or the real estate systems that best help to support people with disabilities in terms of making it affordable, accessible, and everything in between.
Other types of conditions that might be perceived as disabling are a part of your market. You mentioned that you support people with traumatic brain injuries, as well as behavioral health and substance abuse markets. Do you have to have a different perspective coming from the DD world in how you work with those providers in what you're doing at Scioto?
Somewhat. So the real estate looks a little bit different as you move into some of these, adjacent markets, as we call them. So, in our 20-year history as an organization, predominantly we've owned single-family homes. But as we move into behavioral health or traumatic brain injury or substance abuse, we could be acquiring a small outpatient treatment clinic. We've acquired several of those. It could be a large, traumatic brain injury rehab facility where they provide OT, PT, speech therapy services to individuals that are coming in. So it doesn't always have the residential aspect to it. It can, but the real estate is much more commercial as opposed to just being a single family home. And so, we've aggressively moved into those markets to diversify our portfolio over the last several years. And have grown quite a bit just by trying to support and service those markets. So the real estate looks a little bit different in those markets. It's provider issues are all the same across the country. Regardless of the market, they all struggle with staffing. That is the biggest struggle in healthcare right now. So
yeah. So on your website, it talks about Scioto being unique, being different than other companies like yours, some of whom I've spoken with on this show. What is the unique sales proposition? What is the unique thing about Scioto that you guys are proud of?
Yeah, I mean, we have a tremendous amount of respect for all of our competitors, just in terms of what they try to do day in and day out, which is the same thing as us, provide, quality real estate to people with disabilities. I think, what really separates us, and I mentioned this earlier, is that, we're not the landlord that simply sits back and collects a rent check. We've invested a lot of resources in things like we have a vice president of government affairs on staff now that is working from a legislative standpoint to try to figure out how can we improve housing nationally for people with disabilities to make it more affordable, more accessible. Because of that position that we hired, I was very fortunate to travel to Washington, D.C. late last year and meet with HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge and have a conversation with her about housing for individuals with developmental disabilities and mental health disorders. And, at the time she had just been appointed to office, and she had indicated to me that was the number one concern that she was hearing, bar none, above everything else that she was encountered to in her first, months in office. She indicated that was the number one concern that she was hearing across the board was about housing. And so we were fortunate to meet with her. Since then, we've continued conversations with her office in terms of, ways to make housing more affordable. How do we address the housing crisis for people with disabilities? So we just don't sit back and collect a check. We're doing those types of things. We also try to figure out, because of our history of having, a president that has led, healthcare service provider organizations, we're also trying to figure out how do we help be a part of reinventing service delivery, but doing it in, real estate settings that are, again, accessible, affordable, and have the right layout, the right footprint. A lot of times what we see are providers wanting to just go with the cheapest option, but the cheapest option doesn't always prevent the best healthcare outcomes for the people that they're trying to serve. And so, with our background on the service provider side, we're able to just kind of take a step back from what it is they're wanting. And in many occasions, we make recommendations that ultimately put them in different types of real estate, to which they can be the most successful. And if the providers that we help support are successful, then obviously the individuals that we're all collectively supporting are going to be successful and have better outcomes.
So it intrigues me that you're in so many states. So 80% of the states, soon to be a little over 80% of the states.
Yeah.
As I've interviewed people and talked to people from all over the country, I found that there's a lot of discrepancy between how states manage the whole issue of accessibility and housing. And I've recently learned that some states have structural barriers that make it really hard to develop new accessible housing for people. Have you found that? And are there any states that you would point out as having a more challenging environment and that is hard for you to be able to be effective in?
I think it's a great question. I think every state is different. There's 50 different, I say that about it. I feel like once a week I say to someone, Medicaid is really run by the states. And so we service a large Medicaid population. And so there's 50 different ways of managing Medicaid.
They don't even call it Medicaid in California. They call it Medi-Cal.
Medi-Cal, that's right. Yeah. And so every state has its nuances. They're all very different. And anytime we're working or I'm talking to a different state or a different healthcare partner in a state, I always have to put that state's cap on and think, okay, this is the state of Michigan or Rhode Island or whichever state it is we're talking to, and kind of go back to what it is that they require. Or not only require, but what are the nuances that come up with real estate in that particular market and some of the challenges. I mean, there's definitely inventory issues in some states versus others. There's some states where I know that new construction probably isn't going to be an option because of affordability. But if it's modular versus stick built, it's going to be more affordable for that particular state. So it's definitely a challenge for us, being in 40 states. But again, we love working with every state. Hopefully it'll be 50 at some point. It's just, you do have to take a step back and just think about how each state individually works, what the individual quirks are with each state, and what's the best way to structure, real estate deals that are productive for the providers that we work with, but will also, most importantly, benefit the individuals that we all collectively serve.
So is there a state that you could point to that you'd love to get into if the environment were better in all those aspects?
I mentioned Arkansas. Arkansas is a state that definitely has real estate challenges. I see it as a state that has huge potential opportunity. It's just trying to figure out, what does the real estate look like? It may not look like what it currently does in the state of Arkansas. We might have to adapt it or do some, ground up or modular construction work to make it be something that will help to better serve individuals in community-based settings. So it may not quite look like a single family home. It may look more like a duplex or something like that that's going to be more affordable. You just kind of have to think through the nuances of each state, but I kind of see it as the land of opportunity. So there are challenges. There's challenges in California. Everything is so expensive, but you just kind of have to put your best foot forward in terms of, what are the options? What do individuals specifically need? What can the state help support? One of the things that we also try to do is try to talk to managed care organizations that are heavily involved in the IDD population. Are there ways for them to help support it? Because if they can help support it, maybe the end result will be less hospital admissions for people with disabilities. And that's obviously cheaper for MCOs. And so, there are some states that are very MCO driven, where the IDD system, managed care organization.
Okay.
Managed care organization. So insurance companies,
Yeah.
So instead of maybe like a state that has, like a Department of Developmental Disabilities, it's really more of an MCO or managed healthcare model where you have the insurance companies very involved. And so they very much have a vested interest when they're very involved in managing the system in trying to keep people out of hospitals. And so we feel that we can play a part in terms of, what are the types of real estate settings that we can help design, build, buy, rehab that is going to be the most conducive to having the best possible outcomes for the people that we provide, housing to. And in turn, it helps to reduce hospital recidivism rates. That's cheaper for
Right.
insurance companies. And
Well,
so,
we're seeing CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medi-Cal, getting around this a little bit more because there's a new programs I'm seeing pop up all over the country, including in California, where you can use Medicaid funding to support people looking for housing who are on Medicaid or Medi-Cal. And I think that's to a certain extent could be really innovative, is finally getting a more holistic perspective of what makes for a healthy life and healthy circumstance.
yeah, I totally, that is a new initiative in a couple states now, I think. And that really excites me. Really as a former provider, but also working on the real estate side now, I think that creates so many more opportunities for people to move out of larger facilities and to be integrated with the general public. So I hope more states move in that direction. Hopefully it's successful. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. What about urban rural? I mean, you talked about high cost of living and high rents. Do you find that you're more successful developing housing in rural or suburban areas away from the major centers because of the lower rents there?
We really acquire real estate in every market. There definitely has been in this environment where real estate inventory is less than it used to be. Trying to find more affordable housing for us to lease to providers, and sometimes that is in more rural settings. Depending on the type of real estate, there could be more risk to us on the real estate side if it's in a really, really, really rural setting. One of the things that it's really pretty interesting that we've seen over the last couple of years is that as we've moved more and more into the behavioral health space, we've seen service providers that want to be in rural settings just because they've had issues that have come up with individuals that they serve and their mental health diagnosis and, things that have happened maybe in the community. Or I think there's this perception that everybody with a developmental disability is going to be a sex offender. And that's just not the case. I've known very few sex offenders that have, IDD. And so, we do a lot of fair housing work as well, and trying to really promote and support individuals with disabilities, behavioral health conditions. And in terms of urban and rural, we really acquire real estate everywhere. Usually when we have requests for rural, it's not because it's cheaper. It's really more of based off the population they're wanting to serve. They want to have it be out of city limits, just so they don't have to deal with maybe like homeowners association or the worry or stress of fair housing issues coming up down the road. So we have a lot of times where providers want to try to avoid that from the get-go. And it's actually sad and it's unfortunate that, there's just still a great misconception about individuals with developmental disabilities as well as mental health conditions that, they're just going to be horrible for your community. And it's simply not the case. And I think it's
almost sometimes the opposite, actually.
It is, yeah. I mean, and I've seen many situations actually nationally where it's actually been a blessing that a group home has come into the community because they can get involved and be an active participant in the community. And I've seen that happen many times over my 25 plus years in the IDD space.
So I'm glad you mentioned 25 plus years. So what got you involved in this work, first as a provider and now in this developmental role? And why do you do it?
Wow, what a great question. So I actually stumbled upon the IDD industry. I don't think anybody that gets into serving individuals with developmental disabilities, goes to college and says, "Hey, I want to help support people with disabilities in group homes or in facilities." I had to do a practicum in college, and I had to select someone to kind of partner with. And so the person that I partnered with was Susan Arnosky, who was at the time, she was the executive director for advocacy and protective services. And so I started working at that agency, and it was and is still the guardianship agency in the state of Ohio for individuals with developmental disabilities. And so I did my practicum there, and they actually hired me out of college, and I fell in love with the industry in terms of supporting people with disabilities. And after about 2 or 3 years there, I really got the bug to work on the provider side, and built a 20-year career with the same provider organization based here in Ohio. Fell in love with not only that company, but their mission and just serving people with disabilities. Really helped that organization to grow and diversify into serving different markets. And I hit the 20-year mark, and I was contacted by a recruiter about working at Scioto Properties. And at the time, I had been actually a 20-year customer of Scioto Properties. So on the provider side, I was actually working with Scioto, acquiring homes, developing them into group homes or intermediate care facilities. And I wasn't looking to leave the provider agency I was working with, but I was familiar with Scioto. I fell in love really with what their mission was the more I learned about it. I really felt that I could make a difference in trying to help, get people out of institutionalized care and into community-based housing, again, that's affordable and accessible. And so here I am. It's been 3.5 years. I've loved the challenge of moving into the real estate world from the provider side, but I definitely would say, my 20+ year career on the provider side has definitely helped out. And I have providers all the time tell me how much of a difference it means to them to have a real estate partner that actually understands what their struggles are and what they go through on a daily basis. And, I take a lot of pride in that. So, that's my story. It's kind of an interesting one, just in terms of, I just kind of stumbled into the field, but then, I got the bug to work on the provider side, and then having been a customer of Scioto Properties for 20 years to now leading the organization for the last 3.5. So.
Well, that's great, Matt. And I wish we had more time to go even deeper, but I did have one last question. And if I have listeners who are interested in learning more about the model that you guys have and the work you're doing, how can they connect with you and with Scioto?
Yeah, a great way to do that is just through our website. So our website is www.scioto.com. That's www.scioto.com. We've got a contact us section on our website that has all of our contact information. People can reach out that way, or can always feel free to email me at mmumma@scioto.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.